9 days before his death, an 86-year-old man posted a video of himself sparring on a beach in Hawaii. The caption read like a joke and a warning at the same time. "I don't age. I level up." 9 days later, that man was gone, and for the first time in over a decade, the headline was true. For years, the internet had killed Chuck Norris more times than any studio ever dared to on-screen. A fake car crash story circulated in 2023. A COVID hoax spread across Facebook years earlier. Every single time, Norris was alive, and every time, the joke seemed to prove the myth. Nothing could actually kill him, not even the internet's own rumors. Then, on March 19, 2026, it happened for real. Norris was hospitalized on the island of Kauai after a sudden medical emergency, while staying at the oceanfront property he and his wife owned on the island's north shore. People close to him said he'd been in good spirits just a day earlier, joking with a friend on the phone and training as usual. Within roughly 24 hours, he was gone. He was 86 years old. His family never released a cause of death. What they did release was a short statement posted the following morning, asking the public for privacy while they grieved. It described him as a devoted husband, father, and grandfather, and thanked fans not simply for watching his work, but for the support that had followed him for decades. That distinction, thanking people for loving him rather than for consuming him, said something about how his family wanted him remembered, separate from the legend built by fists, roundhouse kicks, and internet jokes. The reaction was immediate. Political figures, entertainers, and former co-stars posted tributes within hours. Even CBS, the network he had once taken to court over unpaid earnings, issued a public statement mourning his passing, an unusual moment for a man who'd spent years fighting institutions from the outside. And almost as quickly as the tributes came, so did the questions about money. What exactly had Chuck Norris built over 60 years of martial arts, film, television, and business? Where was it going? And why did the answer turn out to be more complicated and far more human than most people expected? Multiple financial outlets, including Celebrity Net Worth and Fortune, placed his estate at approximately $70 million at the time of his death. That figure had held fairly steady for the last several years of his life. Norris wasn't a star whose fortune spiked and collapsed with a single blockbuster or bad investment. It was built slowly, the same way he'd built a stack of black belts decades earlier, one deliberate step at a time. But the number alone explains almost nothing. His estate includes a roughly 1,000-acre ranch in Navasota, Texas, that served as the family's primary home since he stepped back from Hollywood around 2012. It includes the Kauai vacation property, estimated at around $7 million, near where he died. It includes a bottled water company built after an accidental discovery underground on the ranch, decades of film and television royalties, proceeds from a fitness equipment partnership that ran nearly 30 years, book royalties, and syndication income from a show that aired in more than 100 countries. No public will has surfaced. Under Texas community property law, his wife, Gina, is likely entitled to roughly half of the marital estate automatically, with the rest divided among his children. He had 5 children total, from 2 marriages and 1 relationship early in his life that he kept private for nearly 3 decades. Gina already holds a controlling 51% ownership stake in the family's water company as CEO, meaning that business stays firmly under her control no matter how the rest of the estate is divided. The ranch, home base for well over a decade, is where his twin children, now in their mid-20s, largely grew up. Notably absent from any inheritance is his first wife, Diane Holchek, who died in December 2025, just 3 months before Norris, after a long battle with dementia. The two had divorced in 1989, but their 2 sons stayed by her side until the end. In the final months of his life, Norris lost his first wife, and then, within months, his own life ended too. That detail rarely makes the headlines about his fortune, but it matters for understanding who he was at the end, not just what he left behind. There's one more piece of the family story that stayed hidden for nearly 30 years, and it changes how you read that request to be thanked for loving him. It's worth pausing here on just how strange it was for a man's real death to compete with a decade of fake ones. Long before he died, Chuck Norris facts, Exaggerated one-liners about his supposed indestructibility had become one of the internet's most recognizable running jokes, and he leaned into it happily in interviews for years. But that same mythology meant that when the real news finally arrived, plenty of people online assumed it was just another hoax, and fact-checkers had to step in quickly to confirm, using statements from his own family and verified reporting, that this time it was real. Long before the ranch or a single roundhouse kick reached a movie screen, there was a shy kid in Ryan, Oklahoma, who later described himself as neurotic. Carlos Ray Norris was born March 10, 1940, and barely survived his own birth, arriving as what doctors called a blue baby, born with dangerously low oxygen. His mother, Wilma, worked low-paying jobs to hold the family together. His father, Ray, a World War II veteran, came home changed and struggled with alcohol for years, often disappearing for stretches. Norris later wrote that the house was calmer when his father was gone. The family bounced between Oklahoma, Kansas, and California chasing work that never quite paid enough. By the time he graduated high school in Torrance, California, in 1958, nobody would have predicted what came next. He was a smaller, non-athletic teenager who, by his own admission, had never succeeded at anything difficult. That same year, he enlisted in the Air Force and married his high school girlfriend, Diane Holchek. She was 17. He was 18. The Air Force sent him to South Korea, and there, almost by accident, everything changed. He wandered into a Tang Soo Do class on base and became completely absorbed, training for hours nearly every night. He earned his black belt in about 13 months. He later described it as the first time in his life he'd accomplished something difficult purely through his own effort, arguably the real origin point of everything that followed. After his 1962 discharge, he applied to become a police officer and, while waiting, started teaching karate in his parents' backyard. Within a few years, that hobby had grown into a chain of more than 30 studios across Southern California, with students including Steve McQueen and Priscilla Presley. He became a 6-time professional karate champion and won a major national title in 1969. Then, at a tournament in New York, he met the man who would reshape his life. Bruce Lee noticed Norris at that tournament and sought him out afterward. The two trained together for roughly 2 years in Lee's backyard in Los Angeles, comparing techniques and philosophies, and both improved dramatically. Eventually, Lee called in the friendship as a favor, needing someone credible to play the villain in the climactic fight scene of a film he was directing in Rome, staged at the Colosseum, without official filming permission. That film became a massive worldwide hit relative to its tiny budget, and it made Norris famous, ironically, for losing a fight on screen to the man he later called the greatest martial artist who ever lived. After Lee's sudden death in 1973, his widow moved near the Norris family, and Norris spent evenings telling Lee's young son stories about his father. It was actually Steve McQueen, one of Norris's karate students, who first pushed him toward acting, telling him he had the presence for it. Norris enrolled in acting classes and slowly built a film career, at one point self-financing distribution for a film no studio would pick up, a movie that made back nearly 18 times its budget. By the early 1990s, he'd appeared in more than 20 films and built a loyal audience, but he still hadn't found the project that would make him a permanent fixture of American culture. Walker, Texas Ranger, premiered on CBS in 1993 and nearly collapsed before it had a chance. The original production company went bankrupt during the first season, after only a handful of episodes were finished. CBS was reportedly ready to cancel the show when premiere ratings came back stronger than anyone expected, with well over a quarter of televisions in use during that time slot tuned in. New production partners were found, and the show survived. What followed was 9 seasons and over 200 episodes, the first primetime network drama filmed entirely in Texas. Norris kept tight creative control through his own production company, insisted on storylines reflecting his personal faith, brought his brother on as producer, and performed the theme song himself. His contract reportedly included a per-episode fee in the mid-6 figures plus a share of profits, and across the show's run his acting fees alone are estimated at tens of millions of dollars. Syndication took the show global, airing in more than 100 countries, and later court filings revealed total franchise revenue exceeding $690 million. That number is also where the story turns considerably less friendly. In 2018, Norris sued CBS and its parent studio, alleging the network owed him more than $30 million in unpaid profit participation, arguing it had structured later streaming deals specifically to avoid triggering his contractual share. The case dragged on for roughly 5 years before settling out of court in 2023 for an undisclosed amount, now folded into the estate his family is currently sorting through. Norris built a very specific public image: disciplined, faithful, a devoted family man. For the most part, that image was genuine, but one part of his life stayed almost entirely hidden for close to 3 decades. In 1962, while waiting out his Air Force discharge in California, Norris met a woman named Johanna at a bar and didn't tell her he was already married. Their brief relationship produced a daughter, born in early 1963. Johanna later discovered he was married, raised their daughter, Dina, entirely on her own, and eventually told her the truth as a teenager, with explicit instructions not to make contact. For 26 years, Dina carried that knowledge without reaching out. After Norris and Diane's divorce became public in 1989, she finally wrote to him. In his memoir, Norris described recognizing her instantly the moment she walked into his living room, seeing his own face looking back at him. Both reportedly broke down in tears on the spot. He later wrote a line that became one of the most quoted things he ever said outside a film role, that there may be illegitimate parents in the world, and he was one of them, but there is no such thing as an illegitimate child. Dina was fully welcomed into the family, and by 2015, he was publicly sharing vacation photos with her and her children from the same Hawaiian island where he would later die. In total, Norris had 5 children, 2 sons from his first marriage, one a filmmaker and one a respected Hollywood stunt coordinator and former racing champion, twin children from his second marriage who grew up on the ranch, and Dina, who proved the man behind the legend was more complicated and more human than any highlight reel ever suggested. In late 2012, his wife, Gina, underwent 3 MRI scans within 8 days for rheumatoid arthritis, each involving an injection of gadolinium contrast dye, a substance meant to pass through the body harmlessly within hours. In her case, it reportedly never fully left her system. Within hours of the first injection, she began experiencing a burning sensation throughout her body and was rushed to the emergency room multiple nights in a row. Symptoms escalated to violent tremors, kidney damage, loss of function in one arm, cognitive difficulties, and severe muscle deterioration. Doctors tested her for cancer, ALS, Parkinson's, and MS. Every test came back negative. Gina eventually became convinced the contrast agent had become permanently trapped in her body, a theory her medical team reportedly dismissed. Norris later said he believed he was losing her. He arranged a private flight to get her to a specialist in Nevada for chelation therapy. Testing there reportedly confirmed her gadolinium levels were, in the treating doctor's words, off the charts. Norris slept beside her bed for months, and later said he stepped away from acting almost entirely to keep her alive. The total cost of her care over roughly 5 years is estimated near $2 million, almost entirely out of pocket. In 2017, the couple filed a $10 million lawsuit against 11 pharmaceutical companies. Both testified before a federal advisory panel that year, which subsequently recommended new warning labels for gadolinium contrast agents. Regulators in Europe went further, suspending several similar products outright. The lawsuit was voluntarily dismissed in 2020 without a settlement, but it's widely credited with helping trigger regulatory changes that now protect other patients. This state wasn't built on film royalties alone. A fitness equipment partnership, co-promoted for nearly 30 years across dozens of countries, sold millions of units, and became one of the longest-running celebrity endorsement deals in television history. The Texas ranch turned into its own unexpected source of income. In 2011, workers drilling for water accidentally struck an ancient underground aquifer, a discovery that eventually led Norris and Gina to launch a bottled water company in 2015, built around a production facility on the ranch itself. Gina retains majority ownership and full control as CEO, meaning it stays intact regardless of how the rest of the estate is divided. Norris also founded a martial arts-based youth mentorship program in 1990, with early support from a sitting U.S. president. Over more than 3 decades, it grew to serve dozens of schools and well over 100,000 young people. By his own account, it was the project he was proudest of in his entire career, more than any film role, because it quietly gave thousands of teenagers a sense of discipline that followed them long after they left. The debate over exactly who Chuck Norris was began almost the moment news of his death broke. He was, by every account, a genuinely devoted Christian who called faith the most important part of his identity. He was a longtime gun rights advocate, involved for years in political endorsements, including a 2007 campaign ad credited with shifting momentum in a presidential primary race, and a later endorsement of Donald Trump. He wrote a political column for a conservative outlet for close to 2 decades. In the days after his death, at least one entertainment outlet published a piece arguing his political involvement had overshadowed his broader legacy. The backlash was immediate, and the argument shows no sign of settling soon. What isn't up for debate is the fortune itself. The ranch, the water company, decades of royalties, a hard-won settlement with a major network, a property in Hawaii, all of it real, and all of it currently being divided among the people who loved him most. But the reason his family specifically asked the public to thank them for loving him, rather than simply for watching him, is that the man underneath the legend was always more complicated, more human, and ultimately more worth understanding than the myth built around punchlines and roundhouse kicks ever let on. To understand why his death hit as hard as it did, you have to understand how deeply the 1980s cemented him as one of the defining action stars of that era. Films built around a lone, quiet, morally certain fighter taking on impossible odds became something of a signature for him. Audiences weren't going to see complex character studies. They were going to watch a slightly built kid from Oklahoma, who by his own account had never succeeded at anything difficult growing up, methodically dismantle whoever stood in his way, without ever raising his voice. That formula worked because it wasn't really an act. People who trained alongside him, going back to those backyard sessions with Bruce Lee, consistently described the same thing. A calm that was genuine, not performed, built over 2 decades in dojos, on competition mats, and eventually on a television set in Texas that ran, by CBS's own account, almost entirely on time and on budget for 9 consecutive seasons. Beyond film and television, Norris built a career that extended well past acting. He authored multiple books, including a best-selling autobiography detailing his early life, military service, and path into martial arts and film, along with instructional books on martial arts training and Christian living, the 2 pillars he most publicly identified with. Several titles reached national bestseller lists, adding another steady stream of income to an estate that rarely depended on any single source. He also founded his own martial arts discipline, blending styles